Republicans are now leading, some of those without many returns in yet. 9 where they're leading. The Republicans have already taken 4 seats from the Democrats. It could be possible tonight that on the Reagan coattails and with this conservative tide across the country, 13 seats will be won by the Democrats, the largest in modern times in the Senate in a single race, turning the control of the United States Senate handily over to the Republicans. And furthermore, every one of those Republican senators is more conservative than the Democrats they are ousting, some considerably more conservative, some far to the right compared to where the Democrats they have driven out of office have been or are driving out of office if all of this turns out. Now, all of these races may not go the way they're indicated right now, but that's what would appear to be the situation at the moment. In the state of Missouri, we just had a gubernatorial call there. It was expected to be a close race in a rematch, a rematch there between Christopher Bond and the present governor, Joseph Teasdale. Teasdale ousted Bond a couple of years ago, and now Bond came back this year, and according to a CBS News estimate, has won the state house at Jefferson City for the Republicans. So we've got a Senate that looks like it could very well tonight go conservative and Republican by a very considerable margin. The first time either house of the Congress has been in Republican hands since 53, 54, on the heels of the Eisenhower victory in 1952. And in the gubernatorial races, there are also some switches that are possibly going to take place tonight in the 13 races there. In the House of Representatives, as we reported to you earlier, we now have refined our estimate somewhat in the House that the new House will have 250 Democrats, 184 Republicans, which represents a loss of around 25 to 28 seats. That estimate of ours isn't absolutely firm, give or take 7 seats, but it indicates an improvement on the conservative Republican side in the House of Representatives, although the Democrats, of course, with those figures, retain control. Bruce Morton has been looking at the comparison between the Reagan 1980 landslide and the 1972 one put together by Richard Nixon, his fellow Californian. Bruce, come in.
Walter, as you said, the last presidential massacre was in 1972, and the victim, of course, was George McGovern, a Senate loser tonight, who then got just 38% of the vote. We don't know yet what percentage President Carter will end up with, but at the moment it's not very different from McGovern's. Our exit poll shows him with just over 40% in a three-way race, of course. And our poll shows some other similarities to 1972. Then McGovern got just over 48% of the Union vote. Now Carter is doing only a little better. He has about half the Union vote. The two run about the same with Catholics and so on. Defections, in other words, among traditionally Democratic groups. In 1972, though, McGovern's defeat was not a disaster for the Democratic Party. Richard Nixon did not have, to use the old phrase, long coattails. Ronald Reagan's coattail size is still open to question, but certainly, as that regional whip around a couple of minutes showed, the Republicans are making serious Senate gains. As for the House, we asked people in our poll today how they voted for Congress. Those poll figures don't mean anything in terms of who'll win a particular district, but overall, a lot more people today said they were voting Republican for Congress than did 4 years ago. And they don't seem to be doing any more ticket splitting than they did 4 years ago. So what that suggests, as our House estimate suggests, is that the Republicans may make sizable gains in the Congress tonight. Walter?
Earlier this evening, Phil Jones in Washington talked with President Carter's campaign manager and former chief of staff at the White House, Hamilton Jordan.
The presidency of this country is a very difficult job. I don't want to talk tonight, which should be a night of victory for Governor Reagan. I don't want to make a lot of alibis or excuses, but it is a difficult job. We, I think, have made tough decisions. We have not sidestepped issues in the last 4 years. Some of those decisions were politically controversial. There have been things that have happened around the world, such as the OPEC price increases, which had a devastating effect on our economy here at home. And we have still tonight a tragic situation in Iran where 52 Americans are being held hostage. So a number of these things came together. in the last few days of the campaign, and then the tide turned against us. We had an independent candidate running. If many of those people, if he had not been in the race, would have supported the president. So it's a confluence of political and substantive things, plus an effective campaign by Governor Reagan in addressing the issues in a way that appealed to the American people.
With the victory just barely in hand, but a sizable victory that it is, the Reagan campaign forces, and now the transition force becomes that, is already beginning to put back together some of the loose ends that came apart in the last part of the campaign. At least according to Reuters, William Casey, who is the Reagan campaign chief, is saying tonight that Richard Allen, the foreign affairs advisor to Reagan, who withdrew a week ago because of charges of financial impropriety when he was in the Nixon administration, has rejoined, as of tonight, the Reagan staff. Allen has been mentioned as possibly the national security advisor in the Reagan administration. That would be the job now held under Carter by Zbigniew Brzezinski. As we've been reporting throughout the evening, it is a Reagan landslide tonight. He has won 279 electoral votes, according to our CBS News estimate, as you see on our board there. And Jimmy Carter has won just 35 electoral votes so far. And all of those big western states are yet to be heard from, or a lot of them are. Bill Moyers has a few words to tell us about one-term presidents. Bill?
Walter, listening to Hamilton Jordan a minute ago, I was reminded of something Mr. Jordan said to the staff at the Democratic National Committee not long after Jimmy Carter had been elected in 1976. Said Hamilton Jordan, after one term as governor of Georgia, Jimmy couldn't have been reelected in Georgia for a second term. Maybe he'll wind up that way in 1980. Well, he has. And while his defeat says a lot about the way Jimmy Carter has run things, it also says a lot about the office itself. It's almost a cliche to point out these days that not since 1960 has a president completed 2 terms in the White House or left office with the affection and esteem of his countrymen. Kennedy, elected and assassinated. Johnson, elected and discredited. Nixon, elected and disgraced. Ford, appointed and defeated. Carter, elected and defeated. It's rare, in fact, that presidents actually do serve 2 terms, Walter. Just look at the period leading up to this century. Hayes, elected to the smell of scandal. Garfield, assassinated. Arthur denied his party's nomination. Cleveland defeated for re-election by Harrison with a minority of the popular vote. Harrison defeated for re-election by Cleveland. McKinley assassinated. Roosevelt splitting the Republican Party. In fact, 22 of our 39 presidents have been one-term presidents. The good old days were never as placid as we remember them, Walter, and the presidency is more a target of turbulence than an island of stability. We Americans seem to revere the presidency and despise the men who seek it. During the campaign, we compare them to the noblest models. We compare them to Jefferson's brilliance, to Lincoln's wisdom, to the 2 Roosevelts' energy and charisma, to Kennedy's charm. But once they're elected, we look at them as if they were wanted posters at the post office. Yesterday, Ronald Reagan joined hands with his supporters in California and sang, "God bless America." Better he had sang, "God help me." Walter?
Thank you, Bill. And here is another state for Reagan, one that even the Reagan people themselves had thought they might lose tonight. In the Pacific Northwest, Washington has gone for Ronald Reagan. And also in California, in the Senate race there, where Alan Cranston, a liberal Democratic senator, was one of those targeted by conservatives, he has won his race over Paul Gann, who was one of the authors of Proposition 13, the ceiling on property taxes in California. It set off such a wave of that across the country. Alan Cranston has won. He is the first of the liberal senators targeted by the conservatives who has won a race tonight. Others have lost. Birch Bayh in Indiana, John Culver in Iowa, and George McGovern in South Dakota. Ronald Reagan, as you know, is expected soon at his hotel out there in California to address his group, and we will be going there when the time comes, although they say it is still several minutes away. So at this moment, we have 47% of the national vote in and 50% for Reagan, 43% for Carter, but Reagan leading with a whopping 288 electoral votes to 35 for Carter. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
The trade unionists, the Catholics of the North, explains Ronald Reagan's
Had many calls, and you talked about this a while ago. And we had a call from Show Low, Arizona, and several from around town wanting to know how there possibly could be a foul-up in the ballots, or lack of ballots, actually, at some polling places in Tucson. As one person put it to me, the precinct people cross the names off the list as the registered voters go into the booth. The precinct people already know how many are on the list and should know how many are left to vote, certainly. How could they possibly run out of ballots? That's what people want to know. If they had the number that would correspond to the voters registered in that precinct.
And Hank, even before people started voting today, there were legal questions about the handling of absentee ballots. So this has been an election in trouble in Pima County from a week ago, and it remains to be seen when the results will be considered final, with all these legal challenges yet to be heard in court.
I had one person who was very vehement on the phone. This is puzzling to him, he said. So he wants an answer, and he wants it soon.
And obviously it'll be a long time before we'll have the full answers as to what exactly happened and in what status this will leave the election.
That's very true. And we'll have more on that for you, of course, in just 20 minutes or so join us then.
If you're 50 or older, you probably are doing things people half your age wouldn't even consider doing. That's why we at Channel 13 are taking a special look at your lifestyle. Hi, I'm Hank Hubbard. Join me for a special series called 50 Plus And.
Tonight, we'll look at some special services for the elderly.
And don't forget to pick up your free Survivor's Guide at any Southern Arizona branch of Pima Savings. And join me on the news tonight at 10 on Channel 13.
The Tucson Symphony has music for your ears.
This portion of election night is sponsored by the Bell System, keeping your communication system the best in the world. By Polaroid, inventors of instant photography. And by S-Mark, a family of companies serving the families of America. And now from CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Walter Cronkite.
And the Reagan tide rolls on and on, the tide that will make him the 40th President of the United States come next January 20th. He has won now, according to our CBS News estimate, in 2 more of the western states where he was expected to win, Nevada and in Arizona. Nevada's 3 electoral votes, and those in Arizona now go into the Reagan column. That means that in the number of states won, President Carter has still won just 5 states, including the District of Columbia, for a total of now 35 electoral votes. Reagan has won a grand total of 297 electoral votes, all of the states marked in blue there, as you see. 297 to 35. And a very important senatorial race. The Republicans have taken another seat, and this time they have sent into retirement one of the oldest senators in the United States Senate in sense of service, 36 years in the United States Senate, a ranking member of that body, of course, Warren Magnuson, the senator from Washington, has been defeated by the Republican Slade Gorton, according to our CBS News estimate. And here is Ronald Reagan. Let's see if we can listen in. He's in his hotel suite in Los Angeles. I don't think we had audio from that picture anyway. It was a brief shot that they permitted us as he obviously took a congratulatory call from a friend. We assume that that call was not from President Carter. He said he called him some time ago to concede the election and to congratulate him, as did John Anderson, the independent candidate, who incidentally now has a 6% of the votes with just 50% of the national vote counted. Incidentally, with that 50%, half the nation's vote counted, it's 50% still for Reagan, 43% for Carter, 6% for John Anderson. And for Ed Clark, the Libertarian candidate, just a bare 1% of the vote. That 6% for Anderson, if it holds up all evening through the Western state count, will mean that he will collect federal matching funds and perhaps be able to retire a great portion, if not all, of his presidential campaign debt. Let's go now to those Western states and a report from our Western regional reporter, Leslie Stahl.
Walter, Ronald Reagan is taking the West by storm. Let's look at the recap board and see how well he is doing. We don't have any returns in yet from the state of Alaska, but he is decisively beating Jimmy Carter in Arizona. In Colorado, it's, according to our estimate, 58 for Reagan, 32 for Carter. In Idaho, it's 74 for Reagan, 21 for Carter. Montana, 58 to 35. Reagan is winning has won, according to our estimate, or at least is leading in Nevada. Ronald Reagan has won New Mexico, Utah, Washington, where Carter went just yesterday. According to our estimate, he'll win there with 55 to 36 for Carter, and Reagan in Wyoming, 66 to 28. It's an absolute landslide, just trouncing him. As you said, Walter, Warren Magnuson has gone down to defeat in Washington. Age was the big issue, as it was when Jacob Javits ran in the primary here. His opponent, the man who has won, the Republican, Slade Gordon, the Attorney General, raised the age issue very subtly in his ads by jogging and bicycling, never really hitting it straight on. But that and the Reagan landslide in Washington has gone to defeat the senior member of the Senate, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who, by the way, brought the state $1 billion in relief aid for the victims of Mount St. Helens, but that was not enough to convince the voters of Washington to return him to the Senate. He's been in Congress for 44 years, Walter.
Leslie, can you make any suggestion as to what the percentage of vote Reagan is getting over Carter in the West? Because we've got, with 50% of the vote counted, popular vote is now 50% only for Reagan, and clearly the West is going to
It's much more than that. It's 2 to 1 in the West, generally speaking, but we don't have California in yet, and that is about half the West. The interesting thing to watch in the West is that McGovern lost the West with 39% of the vote. And with the states we have so far, Jimmy Carter's defeat could be greater, but it really is difficult to say without the California returns.
At any rate, we can be quite certain that when all of your states are in from the West, we're going to see a much higher percentage of the national vote for Ronald Reagan. This isn't going to be one of those cases which we've had in the past history where a man who wins the presidency with just a bare majority of the votes and sometimes even not a majority of the votes. That has happened in our history 4 times in this century, as a matter of fact, but it's not likely to happen this time with this huge electoral landslide of Ronald Reagan's. CBS News coverage of the presidential election and all the state races will continue in a moment.
Who's that? Dad!
Hi, Truckee. Hi, sweetheart.
Who are you? Daddy!
Hey, Ellen! Hey, everybody, I'm home for dinner.
Give us a second to get over the shock.
When Rudy and his brother started a construction company, working late seemed to become a way of life. The better business got, the more there was to do, with less time to do it in. Then they bought a low-priced IBM computer, the 5120. The perfect computer for small companies with big plans. It helps prepare job estimates, track costs.
Hello. Look, do me a favor. Check the concrete costs, huh? Okay, hold on.
Figure equipment needs and material needs.
Under by $2,400.
IBM never stops searching for new ways to make difficult jobs easier, so people can do more important things, like go home for dinner.
It's going to be strange eating a dinner that hasn't been reheated.
We could wait a while and let it get cold.
IBM, helping put information to work for people.
Nancy Hamilton will cross our path 8 times today. We're S-Mark. We own the companies that supply her peanut butter and turkeys, rubber gloves, baby nursers, her daughter's Danskin tights, fertilizer, oil filters, and motor oil. We're S-Mark, a big company with a big stake in Nancy Hamilton and in you.
Where in the world are we? Now, what's this place?
Welcome to the last place on earth.
Look at all this.
Dear.
Like my boutique? Cute.
Yeah, we just have traveler's checks.
Citicorp?
Yes.
Love them.
Imagine Citicorp Traveler's checks are even accepted in the last place on earth.
Our lucky day.
Travel the world with us, Citicorp Traveler's Checks.
According to our CBS News estimate, another state for Reagan, Oregon, has fallen into his long list of states he's won tonight. That was another one that even the Republicans had thought maybe the Democrats would take tonight. Well, they didn't. Reagan has made a clean sweep now of all of the western states that we have been able to count so far. Everything west of the Mississippi except Minnesota has gone for Reagan as on our count. Let's get an update now from Bill Plant at the Century Plaza Hotel on what's happened to Governor Reagan. We thought we'd be down there amongst you by now, Bill.
Walter, we're expecting Governor Reagan in about 20, 25 minutes, but we know that earlier you saw some pictures of Governor Reagan up in his suite. Some of us were up there then, and I can tell you that he is absolutely overjoyed. He's talking on the telephone to people around the country, and we heard him say to Governor William Clements of Texas, said, "I feel just great. This is just unbelievable, isn't it?" And it's plain that not only Ronald Reagan, but also Nancy Reagan feels that way. She told us that she was relieved. She also said that she'd be happy to get some sleep. Reagan's pollster, Richard Worthland, now projects that they'll probably get more than 400 electoral votes. They had said about 390, as you heard earlier before, and think now it'll go over the 400 mark. The governor's been working on his speech, the one that he'll give down here when he comes in.
Bill,
So.
Bill,
Yeah,
let me interrupt you. California, according to the CBS News estimate, has gone for Ronald Reagan. I don't think anybody really expected otherwise. Even President Carter didn't make a last-minute campaign appearance there despite his earlier plans. But that state is in the Reagan camp now, and that puts his electoral count up there, 348 now. Go ahead, Bill.
Walter, the electoral count at 348 and still climbing is pretty much what the Reagan strategists expect. We were telling you that up in his suite, Governor Reagan was calling people around the country. We know that he talked to Senator Paul Laxalt, his close friend and the nominal manager of his campaign. They're very close. He talked to Governor Jim Rhodes of Ohio, somebody who's been with him frequently on the campaign trail, making all of those courtesy calls that you know a politician will make either in defeat or victory. We learned a little bit too, Walter, about what Governor Reagan talked to the president about. He described it as a very nice offer from the president to aid in the transition. He said that he had accepted that because he wanted a smooth transition as well. So it's quite plain that they are absolutely delighted, and we expect to see them down here, Walter, very shortly.
For Bill, have you heard anything about who will head up his transition team? We heard it might be James Baker, who came to him somewhat reluctantly from the George Bush campaigns.
Walter, we understand that that decision has not been made yet. It was due to be made at a noon lunch of the senior staff today. It wasn't made. We're not quite sure why, but we expect that it will be made tomorrow. Names that come up include that of Jim Baker, as you mentioned, Ed Meese, who is the governor's chief of staff, and who will certainly have some major role in a Reagan administration. And, of course, there's Michael Deaver, who is very close, the governor's closest personal aide. We'll hear that tomorrow, we think.
Bill, we also had a report that was carried on Reuters tonight that Bill Casey, the campaign chief, had said that Richard Allen, as of tonight, is back on the Reagan staff. Is there any significance in that?
Well, it wasn't clear to us whether he was going to stay off the staff or not. They were fairly frank in admitting that they didn't want that as a problem in the last few days of the campaign. They didn't want that to be ammunition for the Carter camp. So Mr. Allen voluntarily took himself off, and of course, if he hadn't done it voluntarily, they would have done it for him. He is back. He's wearing his staff pin, and we expect that he will be part of the transition team. His specialty, as you know, is foreign affairs.
Thank you very much, Bill. We'll be talking more with you later on tonight, certainly, and we'll be waiting to hear from Ronald Reagan when he appears there with his victory statement to his supporters at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. CBS News election night coverage will continue in a moment.
Ronald Reagan here in the Century Plaza Ballroom in just about 15 minutes, but as you did see a few minutes ago, he is in his hotel suite on the 19th floor here. He's been making phone calls around the country to people like Paul Laxalt, who was his campaign chairman, Jim Rhodes, the governor of Ohio, who was a key supporter all along. He also talked to a victory celebration in Washington by telephone. He told the people there that this was the biggest Republican victory in a long time. Something big was happening, he said. He also said that he and George Bush were looking forward to being their neighbors there in Washington. Earlier, Mr. Reagan said that he was contacted by President Carter, of course, about 4 hours ago. He said the president told him that he would graciously offer his cooperation on the transition, that he wanted a smooth transition, and Ronald Reagan said that's what we both want. He said he was asked about whether he was surprised about the margin of tonight's victory. He is normally modest about these sorts of things when he wins. He said, I've been more cautious and less optimistic than this. Mrs. Reagan is there with him, of course. They've been accepting congratulations from all of their friends. There's a party of about 40 people going on in their suite there. Nancy Reagan said that she was awake at 3 o'clock this morning. She couldn't sleep, but was relieved that it was all over early tonight and that they would have it all settled without waiting too long this evening. Yes.
Can you hear me? We're going to just take it away from you for just a moment. We'll be back when Ronald Reagan shows up there because Gary Cutley does have a big call for us in the United States Senate. More bad news for the Democrats.
Yes, we were talking about it just a moment ago, Tom. In the state of Washington, NBC News now projects that the incumbent Senator Warren Magnuson has been defeated. The winner there, Republican Slade Gordon. Magnuson, who has been in the Senate now for 5 terms. He's the dean of the Democrats there, one of the most powerful figures. He was the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He is going down to defeat. That means the Republicans so far this evening have picked up 6 Democratic seats. Of course, they needed 10 to win a majority, and they're only 4 away from that right now, and they're another